The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the county courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. The building itself seemed to hum with anticipation, its old walls carrying whispers of countless trials before. This one, but today was different. Today, the entire community seemed to have poured into the courthouse, as though sensing that history, or at least something unforgettable, was about to unfold. Every seat was taken. Rows of townsfolk sat, shoulder to shoulder, their gazes fixed on the center of the courtroom, where a large German shepherd rested quietly at the feet of his handler. His name was Rex, and to many in the room, he was more than just a dog. He was a decorated canine, credited with tracking down dangerous suspects, saving lives, and solving cases that had baffled even seasoned detectives. His reputation had spread. Far beyond the police force, Rex was a symbol of loyalty, intelligence, and unshakable courage. Today, however, Rex was not here as a hero to be celebrated. He was here as part of a trial that had split the community in two. The defendant, a man in his late 30s with a hardened face and restless eyes, sat at the defense table. He wore a pressed shirt and tie, but no amount of tidiness could hide the tension that clung to him like a second skin. He stared at the floor most of the time, avoiding the dog's gaze, though occasionally his eyes flicked up in silent defiance. The prosecution's case relied heavily on Rex. It was Rex who had tracked the defendant through the woods on that fateful night. Rex who had cornered him when human officers could not. Without Rex's involvement, the man might still be free. Yet the defense argued that dogs could be mistaken, that their instincts could be manipulated, that no life or freedom should rest on an animal's reaction. And so the stage was set. Man against dog, truth against doubt, justice against uncertainty. At the back of the courtroom, tucked into a bench on the right-hand side, sat a young mother and her daughter. The woman looked nervous, her fingers twisting in her lap as she tried to keep the 3-year-old occupied. The little girl's name was Emily, and she clutched a worn-out stuffed bunny, so tightly its ears were bent at awkward angles. Her hair, golden and curly, framed a face that was far too innocent for the heavy, serious atmosphere around her. Most people hardly noticed her. To them, Emily was just another child dragged to court because her mother had no one to leave her with. A restless toddler in a room full of adults was nothing unusual. She squirmed, kicked her shoes against the wooden bench, and whispered questions that her mother hushed quickly. No one, neither the jurors, nor the lawyers, nor the judge, perched. High on his bench, imagined that this small child would become the focus of the entire proceeding. The judge, a stern man with silver hair and an unyielding expression, banged his gavel, calling the court to order. The sound echoed like thunder, commanding silence. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even Rex lifted his head slightly, his dark eyes calm yet alert. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the judge began, his voice firm, "you are here to hear the truth. It is your duty to weigh the evidence presented before you and render a verdict based on facts, not speculation. The prosecution will present its case, the defense will respond, and you will decide." The prosecutor rose, a woman with sharp features and a steady voice. She began outlining the events of the night in question, detailing how Rex and his handler had been called to track a suspect after a crime that had left the community shaken. Her words painted a vivid picture of danger, pursuit, and resolution, one in which Rex's keen senses had led directly to the man now sitting at the defense table. As she spoke, reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching across notepads. Every few minutes, a click of a camera shutter cut through the silence, capturing the intensity of the moment. Jurors leaned forward, some nodding, others frowning in concentration. It was the kind of case that tested more than just the law. It tested belief. Could a dog's instincts be trusted to decide a man's fate? Through it all, Rex remained steady, his gaze occasionally shifting from his handler to the little girl across the room. No one paid much attention to it at first, but Emily noticed. Her bright blue eyes locked on the dog, and she stopped fidgeting for the first time all morning. She hugged her bunny tighter, her lips parting as though she wanted to say something, but didn't dare. Her mother leaned down, whispering, Sweetheart, just sit still. We'll go soon." Emily nodded absently, but her attention never left Rex. It was as though something in her small heart recognized him, as though an invisible thread connected the child to the dog. Meanwhile, the defense attorney rose, pacing slowly before the jury. His tone was confident, even mocking at times, as he argued that animals could be trained to react in ways that fit a narrative. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, gesturing toward Rex, "this is not about heroism. This is about facts. A dog may be brave, but bravery does not make him infallible. Are we to imprison a man based on the bark or paw of an animal?" A few jurors shifted uncomfortably, considering his words. The tension grew thicker, pressing down on everyone in the room. At the defense table, the accused man smirked faintly, as if the argument might save him. But every time Rex's gaze swept in his direction, his smirk faltered and his jaw clenched. The hours dragged on. Witnesses were called, evidence presented, and arguments volleyed back and forth. The air was heavy, thick with judgment and anticipation. Emily, though restless, continued to sneak glances at Rex. She giggled softly once when his ears perked, and though her mother quickly hushed her, the dog's eyes lingered on her as though listening. No one noticed. Not yet. By midday, the trial had already taken on a rhythm of its own, the adults locked in their battle of words and logic. But beneath it all, unnoticed by nearly everyone, a different story was beginning to take shape. A story not of law or evidence, but of innocence, memory, and an unbreakable bond that defied explanation. The gavel struck again, calling for a short recess. The hum of conversation swelled instantly as people stretched, whispered, and speculated. But in the midst of it all, little Emily tugged on her mother's sleeve, her voice insistent, her eyes shining with recognition. The mother tried to silence her, unaware that within moments, Emily's small, determined voice would pierce through the chaos and bring the entire courtroom to a standstill. And it would all begin with just 2 words. The murmur of voices filled the courtroom as the recess stretched on. Jurors whispered in low tones. Reporters leaned against walls to fire off quick updates to their editors. And lawyers huddled with their teams, strategizing for the next round of questioning. The trial had already stirred more public interest than most cases this courthouse had seen in decades. But beneath the clamor of strategy and speculation, something far quieter and far more mysterious was happening. Emily sat on the hard wooden bench beside her mother, swinging her little legs restlessly. She pressed the stuffed bunny to her cheek, but her eyes never strayed far from Rex. The dog, dignified and still, seemed almost out of place in the swirl of human tension. Yet his presence anchored the room in a way no one could fully explain. He wasn't just a witness of sorts. He was the witness. Emily's mother smoothed her daughter's hair, trying to keep her calm. "Almost done, sweetheart," she whispered. "Just a little longer, then we can go home." But Emily wasn't listening. Her small voice bubbled up, low at first, but insistent. "Mama, that's my dog." Her mother froze, glancing sharply at her. "What are you talking about?" Emily's eyes were wide, fixed on Rex. "That's my good boy." Her mother shook her head quickly, panic flickering across her face. She pulled Emily closer, hushing her. "No, darling. You've never seen him before. You're just tired. Be quiet now." But Emily's certainty didn't waver. Across the room, Rex shifted suddenly, ears pricking up as though he had heard her from across the noisy courtroom. His dark eyes fixed on the little girl, and for a long moment, handler and jury alike were forgotten. The air between them charged with a recognition too deep to ignore. The recess ended abruptly when the judge returned, his gavel bringing order once again. Conversations cut off mid-sentence, chairs scraped, and all attention returned to the front of the courtroom. The prosecution resumed their argument, their voices measured but fierce. "This dog," the prosecutor said, gesturing toward Rex, "is not just a tool of law enforcement. He is a protector. On that night, when lives were in danger, it was Rex who led officers directly to the accused. Without him, we would not be here today. Without him, justice would remain unfinished." The jurors nodded thoughtfully, some clearly moved by the reminder of the K-9's role. But the defense attorney was ready, his face a mask of calm skepticism. He rose slowly, pacing before the jury as though every step was part of a carefully rehearsed dance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we do not dispute that Rex is a fine animal. He has served his department loyally, and no one questions his bravery. But bravery," he paused deliberately, "is not evidence. Bravery does not make a creature infallible. And what are we doing here if not seeking infallible truth?" His words sank like stones into the silence. The jurors shifted, some folding their arms, others glancing toward Rex with uncertainty. The defense continued. Dogs can be led. Dogs can be influenced. And dogs, ladies and gentlemen, do not testify. They cannot speak. They cannot be cross-examined. Yet the prosecution would have you believe that a man's future, his very freedom, should rest on the instincts of an animal. Ask yourselves, is that justice? The defendant, sitting stiffly at the defense table, lifted his chin slightly, as though emboldened by his lawyer's words. His lips twitched into something resembling a smirk. At the mention of testimony, however, several heads in the gallery turned almost instinctively toward Emily. The irony was lost on no one, while adults debated the limits of a dog's voice. A child too young to be sworn in as a witness sat silently, watching the dog as if she alone understood him. Rex stirred again, his eyes never leaving the little girl. He whined softly under his breath, so faint that only his handler noticed. The officer frowned, glancing down at the dog in surprise. Rex never broke discipline, never reacted inappropriately during proceedings. Yet here he was, reacting not to the lawyers, not to the defendant, but to a child in the gallery. The prosecution pressed on, unfazed by the defense's theatrics. This is not about whether a dog can speak. This is about whether his actions saved lives, and they did. Rex did not hesitate. He followed the scent, tracked the suspect, and led officers to the very man you see seated here. The evidence corroborates his work. This was no coincidence. This was skill. This was truth. Jurors scribbled notes. A woman in the front row dabbed her eyes. The courtroom swayed back and forth on the pendulum of persuasion. Through it all, Emily leaned forward on the bench, her little hand gripping the edge of the seat. Her mother tried again to distract her with the bunny, but Emily whispered, "He knows me, Mama. He remembers me." Her mother's hands trembled. She bent low, her face pale. "Don't say that, Emily. Not here. Please, not here." But the child's words were like sparks catching fire. Each time she spoke, Rex responded, ears up, eyes locked, tail twitching ever so slightly. The handler tried to shift his position to block the view, but nothing could sever the invisible line between them. The defense attorney noticed, his brows furrowing. He glanced between Rex and the little girl, suspicion dawning in his eyes. It was subtle, but his instincts told him something unexpected was happening, something that could either unravel his argument or hand him an opportunity he hadn't planned for. The judge, too, picked up on the ripple of distraction. He cleared his throat, his voice firm. Ladies and gentlemen, let us remain focused. The testimony of counsel will continue, and I expect full attention on the evidence at hand. But no amount of stern words could erase the undercurrent of unease flowing through the room. By the time the recess was called again that afternoon, the air was thick with tension. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing not just the arguments, but the atmosphere, the sharp glances, the subtle shifts, the way one little girl's gaze seemed to hold the courtroom hostage without anyone fully admitting it. As people stood and stretched, Emily tugged harder on her mother's sleeve, her tiny voice urgent now. "Mama, I have to tell them. He's my good boy." Her mother's eyes filled with tears as she tried to quiet her. "No, Emily, you can't. You don't understand. Please." But Emily understood more than her mother realized. Her small heart carried a memory she couldn't yet explain, a truth so powerful it pressed at her lips, demanding to be spoken. And as Rex shifted restlessly, his eyes fixed on her with growing intensity, it was clear that whatever secret tied them together was about to shatter the courtroom's fragile balance. For now, it was still hidden. For now, it was just a whisper between a child and a dog. But the silence couldn't last forever. The second recess was supposed to be a chance for everyone to breathe, to shake off the intensity of testimony and arguments before returning to the rigid formality of trial. But there was no sense of ease in the air. The jurors leaned against the railings, whispering among themselves. The attorneys huddled with their aides, voices sharp and low. Reporters filled the hallway outside, dictating quick updates into phones, their faces lit by excitement. Inside the courtroom, though, it was quieter than before. Tension clung to the walls like smoke, thick and unavoidable. Even the audience in the gallery seemed subdued, as though each person sensed something larger brewing beneath the surface. On the far right bench, little Emily shifted restlessly on her seat. She swung her small legs, the heels of her shoes tapping softly against the wood. Her stuffed bunny dangled from one arm, forgotten. Her attention was locked entirely on Rex. The big German shepherd had moved very little since the morning session. Yet somehow, his presence seemed more alive than anything else in the room. His handler stood rigid at his side, occasionally checking the leash as though wary of some unexpected reaction. And perhaps he was right to worry, for Rex's eyes hadn't left Emily. The dog's gaze followed her every movement, ears twitching at the faintest sound she made. It was as though he recognized her, as though he'd been waiting for her. Emily tugged at her mother's sleeve again. "Mama," she whispered, "he's my good boy." Her mother's face drained of color. She pressed her finger to her lips, pleading silently. "Not now. Please, Emily. Not here." But Emily's determination grew stronger with every second. Her little chest rose and fell quickly, her eyes shining with something beyond childish stubbornness. She wriggled free of her mother's arm and stood up on the bench. The sudden movement drew attention. A few nearby spectators glanced over, some smiling indulgently at the sight of a restless child. But then Emily raised her tiny hand and pointed straight at Rex. The shift in the atmosphere was immediate. Conversations faltered, heads turned. In seconds, every pair of eyes in the courtroom locked onto the small girl with the golden curls. Her mother reached for her, whispering frantically, "Sit down, Emily, sit down." But the child didn't move. Her finger remained steady, her gaze unwavering. The handler stiffened as Rex let out a low whine, his tail tapping once against the floor. "Order," the judge barked, though his gavel remained still. Even he seemed curious. Emily opened her mouth. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the scratching of reporters' pens went silent. Two words, small and clear, broke the stillness. "Good boy." It was barely louder than a whisper, but it carried through the courtroom like thunder. The reaction was instantaneous. Rex shot to his feet, his body quivering with recognition. His tail wagged furiously, a blur of motion. He let out a whine that deepened into a soft bark, straining against the leash in his handler's grip. Gasps echoed across the room. Spectators leaned forward. Jurors' mouths fell open. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment. The judge's gavel finally struck, but it did little to cut through the shock. The prosecutor blinked in surprise, her carefully rehearsed arguments momentarily forgotten. The defense attorney raised his eyebrows, though behind his calm mask, unease flickered. The defendant himself shifted uncomfortably, his smug composure unraveling. Silence in the court. The judge thundered, his voice tinged with irritation and confusion. What is the meaning of this disruption? But the disruption wasn't ending. It was only beginning. Emily's mother pulled her daughter into her lap, clutching her tightly. "I'm so sorry, Your Honor," she stammered, her voice trembling. She doesn't understand. She's just a child. Yet the dog's reaction couldn't be ignored. Rex strained toward Emily, whining, tail sweeping the floor with force. It was a display no one in the room had ever seen from the disciplined canine. He had sat through hours of proceedings, unfazed by shouting lawyers, by stern commands, by the tension of the trial. Yet a toddler's soft praise had unraveled his training completely. Jurors exchanged bewildered glances. One leaned forward, whispering to another, "Did you see that? He knows her." The handler struggled to maintain control, his jaw tight as he muttered under his breath, "Easy, Rex. Easy, boy." But his grip faltered as Rex surged forward again, desperate to close the distance. Emily giggled softly, her small hand reaching out as though inviting him closer. "Good boy," she repeated. The courtroom seemed to inhale all at once. The judge rubbed his temples, exasperation giving way to something deeper, a dawning realization that this was not mere childish play. "What is going on here?" he demanded. "Counsel, explain this." Neither side had an explanation. The prosecution stood frozen, uncertain how to spin this unexpected turn. The defense opened his mouth, then closed it again, words failing him. All eyes returned to Rex and the child. Their connection pulsed through the room, undeniable, unexplainable. Emily's mother's voice cracked as she whispered to the nearest bailiff, "She doesn't know him. She's never met that dog before. I swear it." The bailiff frowned, glancing between mother, daughter, and dog. His disbelief mirrored the rest of the courtroom. And for the first time that day, the trial's central question shifted. No longer was it just about whether Rex's tracking was reliable. Now, it was about why a 3-year-old girl, with no apparent connection to the case, could shatter the dog's perfect discipline with 2 simple words. The judge leaned back heavily in his chair, his gavel resting unused in his hand. "We will resume in 10 minutes, he said at last, his voice unusually quiet. "Court is in recess." The gavel struck, but the sound was drowned out by the whispering, the scribbling of pens, the clicking of cameras. The story had changed, and at the heart of it stood a child, a dog, and 2 words that refused to be ignored. The judge's gavel still echoed faintly when the courtroom doors closed, sealing the space in a silence far heavier than before. 10 minutes of recess had done nothing to calm the atmosphere. If anything, the tension had grown sharper, each person buzzing with questions that had no immediate answer. By the time everyone filed back to their seats, the air felt charged. Jurors exchanged uncertain glances. Reporters leaned forward, their pens poised as though ready to record history. Even the defendant, who had worn smug confidence earlier, shifted uneasily in his chair, his fingers drumming against the table in nervous rhythm. And then there was Rex. The German shepherd sat stiffly by his handler's side, but there was no mistaking it. Something had changed. His chest rose, and fell quickly, his ears alert, his dark eyes never leaving the bench where little Emily sat with her mother. The leash strained faintly with every shift of his weight. This was not the calm, disciplined canine the courtroom had seen all morning. This was a dog on the edge of breaking protocol, guided by something deeper than training. The judge cleared his throat, his voice carrying through the stillness. This court will come back to order. What happened before recess will be addressed, but we will proceed with today's testimony first. His tone was stern, but even he couldn't mask the flicker of unease in his eyes. He had presided over countless trials, but never had a child's. 2 words caused such disruption. Never had a dog defied its training so visibly. The prosecutor rose, adjusting her jacket with forced composure. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "what you witnessed earlier was unplanned, unanticipated, and irrelevant to the case at hand. This trial is about evidence, about facts." Her words were cut off by a sound that silenced the room more effectively than any gavel. A low whine. Every head turned. Rex was standing now, tail swishing, his gaze fixed on Emily. He let out a sharp bark, then strained against the leash with such force that his handler staggered forward. Gasps erupted from the gallery. The jurors leaned back in surprise. The prosecutor froze. Her argument derailed. "Control your dog." The defense attorney shouted, though his voice betrayed his own shock. The handler struggled, muscles taut, but Rex's strength was formidable. "Rex, heel," he commanded sharply. But the command fell flat. Rex's ears flicked, but his focus never wavered. His eyes shone with recognition, his body vibrating with eagerness as he tried to reach the little girl. Emily squealed with delight, clapping her tiny hands. "Good boy," she called again, her voice high and innocent. The effect was immediate. Rex barked once more, tail wagging furiously. He lunged forward, dragging the handler several steps closer before the officer regained control. The polished floor squeaked under the handler's boots. The leash pulled. Taut as steel. Chaos rippled through the room. Reporters scribbled frantically. Cameras clicked. Murmurs spread like wildfire. The judge's gavel pounded again and again, but order seemed impossible. "This is outrageous." The defense attorney bellowed, his face flushed. How can this trial continue under such theatrics? But deep down, even he couldn't ignore the truth. This wasn't theatrics. This was something else, something real. The prosecutor tried to steady her voice. "Your Honor, the reaction of the canine, while unusual, only proves his extraordinary instincts. Perhaps the jury should take note. Enough." The judge barked, though his own voice cracked slightly. He turned to the handler, eyes narrowing. "Officer, has your dog ever behaved in this manner before?" The handler shook his head firmly, breathless from the struggle. "Never, Your Honor. Rex is one of the most disciplined dogs on the force. He's trained to stay focused, no matter the distraction. This." He glanced at Emily, then back at the judge, bewilderment etched across his face. "This is unprecedented." Emily's mother buried her face in her hands, whispering frantically, "She doesn't know him. She's never seen him before. I swear she hasn't." But Emily only giggled, wriggling out of her mother's grasp. She leaned forward on the bench, tiny fingers stretching toward Rex. "Good boy," she said once more, softer this time, almost like a secret between the two of them. Rex froze, his entire body trembling. Then, with a soft whine, he lowered himself to the ground, crawling forward inch by inch despite the handler's resistance. It was no longer an act of excitement. It was submission, recognition, a reunion. The gallery gasped again, but this time the sound carried all more than fear. "Unbelievable," one juror whispered, hand covering her mouth. The defense attorney looked stricken. his carefully constructed arguments about canine fallibility unraveling before his eyes. How could he claim the dog was unreliable when he displayed such clear, personal recognition of a child supposedly unknown to him? The judge rubbed his temples, clearly torn. "We are walking a dangerous line here," he muttered. But even his stern authority faltered against the weight of what they were witnessing. For a long, heavy moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the rhythmic thump of Rex's tail against the floor and the soft, steady breathing of a little girl who seemed entirely unfazed by the spectacle she had created. Finally, the judge sighed deeply, setting down his gavel. "This court will take an extended recess. When we reconvene, I will expect counsel to address what we have just seen." He turned sharply to the handler. "Officer, control your animal." But even as the order rang out, it was clear. Rex wasn't reacting as a police dog. He wasn't following commands. He wasn't being influenced by cues. He was remembering. And though no one yet knew the full story, everyone in that courtroom felt the same chill. Something far bigger than evidence and arguments was unraveling before their eyes. Emily rested her head against her mother's shoulder, her voice barely audible as she whispered again, "My good boy." And this time, not even the judge dared to silence her. The silence following the judge's extended recess was like a storm cloud hovering in the courtroom. Reporters whispered hurriedly into phones, jurors exchanged wide-eyed glances, and attorneys huddled in tense conferences. Everyone was asking the same question in hushed tones. Why did the dog respond to that child? Rex sat at the end of his handler's leash, body taut as a bowstring. His eyes never strayed from Emily. For all his training, for all the discipline drilled into him during years of service, his focus on the little girl was absolute. He didn't look at the defendant, the jury, or even his partner, just her. Emily, tiny and unshaken, leaned forward on the bench with wide eyes. She clutched her stuffed bunny against her chest, as though it too were waiting to see what would happen. Her small lips curved into a smile that held no fear, only recognition. Her mother, however, was not smiling. Pale and trembling, she tightened her grip on Emily's arm. "Stay still, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice cracking. Her eyes darted nervously between Rex and the attorneys. Something unspoken weighed heavily in her silence, something she wasn't ready to reveal. The judge re-entered, gavel in hand. His expression was weary but resolute. "We will attempt to proceed," he announced, though his tone carried doubt. He gestured toward the handler. "Bring the dog forward. Let's see if controlled interaction clarifies this situation." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Even the stenographer paused her typing, her fingers frozen above the keys. Allowing a police dog to approach a child mid-trial was unheard of, but so was everything that had transpired. The handler looked uncertain, but obeyed. He loosened the leash, murmuring, "Easy, Rex, easy." A German shepherd didn't need encouragement. The instant slack appeared in the line, Rex moved steadily, directly toward Emily. His gait wasn't aggressive. It was deliberate, almost reverent. His tail wagged low, his ears perked, his eyes never leaving the girl. Emily clapped her hands, delighted. "Good boy," she squealed. Her mother flinched, pulling her back slightly. "No, Emily." "Don't?" But Rex stopped short, sitting down just in front of the bench. He lowered his head submissively, tail brushing the yaw. Floor in rhythmic sweeps. His handler's jaw dropped. This was not the posture of a police dog on duty. This was loyalty. This was recognition. The gallery collectively gasped. Some people rose from their seats for a better look. "Order!" The judge thundered, but his own voice faltered with awe. Emily stretched out her hand, small fingers trembling with excitement. Rex leaned in, pressing his nose gently against her palm. A soft whine escaped his throat. The sound carried across the room, slicing through every hardened defense and skeptical doubt. Emily giggled. "See, Mommy? He remembers me." Her words struck like a hammer. Reporters scrambled to capture every syllable, pens scratching furiously. Jurors exchanged shocked looks. The defense attorney blanched, his argument about unreliable canine testimony crumbling. "Remembers you?" The prosecutor echoed, incredulous. She stepped forward cautiously. "Child, what do you mean by that?" Emily tilted her head, puzzled by the grown-up's confusion. "He helped me. He was there, when it was dark." Her mother's hand flew to her mouth. She shook her head violently, whispering, "No, she doesn't remember. She was too young." But Emily wasn't finished. She leaned closer to Rex, stroking his ears. "You saved me, didn't you, boy? You stayed with me." The room erupted, in whispers again. Even the judge sat back heavily in his chair, his stern composure faltering. He gestured sharply to the mother. "Madam, approach the bench." The woman rose reluctantly, clutching Emily's bunny to her chest, as though shielding herself with it. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Explain this," the judge demanded softly, though the entire room could hear. "Has your daughter met this dog before?" She shook her head, trembling. "Not officially, not to my knowledge. She was so little. I thought she'd forgotten." "Forgotten what?" The mother's silence stretched painfully. Her lips quivered. Finally, with a voice barely audible, she confessed, "The night of the break-in. We were both there. I told the police my daughter had slept through it, that she was too young to remember. But she must have seen more than I realized. And this dog," her voice broke, "this dog must have been there too." The prosecutor's eyes widened. "Your Honor, this corroborates Rex's involvement the night of the crime. He didn't just track a scent, he directly protected a witness." The defense attorney shot up from his chair. "Objection. This is outrageous. A toddler's memory cannot be considered credible testimony. And the dog, he's an animal, not a witness." The judge's gavel slammed down. "Sit down, counselor." The defense attorney obeyed, though his face burned red with frustration. Meanwhile, Rex had inched even closer, resting his head against Emily's lap. She stroked his fur as if they had known each other all her short life. Every movement between them radiated trust. One juror wiped tears from her eyes. Another leaned forward, whispering, "It's like they're speaking a language only they understand." The judge pinched the bridge of his nose, clearly grappling with the enormity of the moment. Finally, he exhaled heavily. "This changes things. It seems we are dealing with more than just forensic evidence. We are dealing with memory, with protection, with truth revealed in the unlikeliest of ways." The mother collapsed back into her seat, clutching Emily tightly. Tears streamed down her face. She whispered, "I thought I was protecting her. I didn't know she was already carrying this." Emily patted her mother's hand gently, childlike innocence softening the weight of her words. "Don't cry. Mommy, he's a good boy. He kept me safe." And in that single moment, every person in the courtroom knew the case had shifted. It was no longer just about evidence or arguments. It was about a bond of silent, undeniable truth revealed by a child and a dog. As Rex lay at Emily's feet, tail thumping steadily, it was clear this trial would never be the same again. The courtroom was suspended in an unusual hush, the kind that fills a room when everyone senses that history is unfolding. Every gaze remained fixed on the improbable scene at the front. A 3-year-old girl, seated on her mother's lap, and a German shepherd, trained for years in discipline, lying at her feet, eyes fixed intently on her. Emily's mother clutched her daughter tightly, but there was no tension in the child's movements. She stroked Rex's fur as if she had known him forever. "Good boy," she murmured softly again. The words had become almost a ritual each, repetition reinforcing the bond that seemed impossible yet undeniable. Rex responded immediately, lifting his head, tilting it toward her, and nudging her small hand with his nose. The court collectively inhaled. Even the judge, stern and composed throughout the morning, had paused in his ruling, unsure of how to address the reality before him. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began cautiously, "it appears that the child is recalling events related to the case, events previously unknown to this court." The defense attorney's face hardened. He leaned forward in his chair, whispering sharply to his assistant, "This is absurd. She's 3 years old. A toddler can't testify to anything factual. It's inadmissible." The judge waved him silent, his gaze fixed on Emily. Silence. Let the child speak. If we are to understand the truth of this situation, we must first hear what she has to say. Emily straightened, blinking up at her mother briefly before looking directly at Rex. The German shepherd's ears perked, tail low but moving rhythmically, as if he too understood the significance of the moment. "He helped me," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly but clear. The words cut through the room like a knife. At once, the gallery gasped. Jurors leaned forward, some covering their mouths in shock. Reporters clicked their pens and lifted cameras, unable to stop recording this unprecedented testimony. The judge's gavel rested unused in his hand, forgotten for a moment as everyone absorbed what had been said. The defense attorney sprang to his feet, flustered. "Objection," he shouted. "The child is too young to recall these events. She's making assumptions based on fear or imagination. This is not evidence." "Sit down," the judge barked, his voice stern yet tinged with disbelief. "You will allow the child to speak. Every word she says must be considered in context. This is not speculation. It is a recollection of actual events." Emily's mother's face had gone pale. She whispered urgently to her daughter, "Sweetheart, maybe you shouldn't say anything more." "You might," but Emily had already made up her mind. She leaned closer to Rex, her small hand brushing his soft head. "He stayed with me," she said. "When it was scary, he didn't leave." The courtroom fell utterly silent. Every person, from juror to journalist to defendant, froze. The weight of the moment pressed heavily, unrelenting. Rex responded instantly, shifting closer to the child, resting his massive head against her lap. He gave a soft, satisfied whine as though confirming her words. Even the handler, who had handled hundreds of canine operations without incident, could not hide his astonishment. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said carefully, "this child's recollection confirms the dog's role that night. Rex did more than track the suspect. He protected a witness, a child who could have been in harm's way." The defense attorney's jaw tightened. "This is absurd. Animals cannot testify. A child of 3 cannot be credible in recalling traumatic events with any reliability." The judge's eyes softened, though his stern demeanor remained. "Perhaps, and yet, the evidence before us cannot be ignored. A child speaks, and a dog responds. The implications of this interaction cannot be denied. It is now part of the trial." Emily's mother shook slightly, her hands tightening around her daughter. "She was so small," she whispered. "I thought she didn't see anything. I thought she'd forgotten. I never imagined she remembered him, this dog who saved her that night." Emily's small fingers traced a path across Rex's broad head. "He didn't leave me," she said again. "I was scared. He helped me. He kept me safe." The courtroom murmured in reaction. Jurors leaned forward, some nodding as the meaning sank in. Reporters scribbled furiously, the story unfolding faster than any editor could have imagined. Even the defendant's shoulders sagged, an unmistakable shadow of realization crossing his face. The prosecutor gestured toward Rex. "Ladies and tidy. Gentlemen," she said softly, "you've seen the dog. You've seen the child." She remembers events that night that confirmed the dog's actions and loyalty. This is no longer speculation. It is corroborated memory, witnessed by both a human and an animal. A juror whispered to another, barely audible, "I've never seen anything like this in my life." Rex shifted slightly, his eyes never leaving Emily. It was as if he, too, was aware that the courtroom's perception had shifted completely. He was no longer simply a witness to the pursuit. He was a hero, a protector whose deeds had been silently recognized by the one being he had saved. The judge exhaled heavily, leaning back in his chair. This court will take a brief recess to allow all parties to consider the implications of what we've just witnessed. It is clear that this trial is no longer solely about standard evidence. It is about truth revealed in the most unlikely of ways. As people stood to stretch or whisper, Emily leaned closer to Rex. "Thank you," she murmured. Her words were simple, yet they carried a weight that no courtroom transcript could ever capture. The handler gently guided Rex back to his side, though his grip was loose, allowing the dog to maintain his position near the child. The courtroom remained in a tense, expectant silence. Every person there understood. Something profound had just occurred, and it had irrevocably changed the course of the trial. Outside, reporters rushed to send updates, knowing that the story was already historic. Inside, the jurors exchanged glances, processing that the evidence they had expected to evaluate in logical, procedural terms had now been supplemented by something deeply emotional, intuitive, and almost impossible to explain. Emily leaned back on her mother, her small hand resting atop Rex's head. "He's my good boy," she whispered once more, her voice soft but confident. And in that one statement, the courtroom seemed to agree this was more than a dog. This was a guardian, a witness, and a silent hero whose actions had now been validated by the memory of a child. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, calling for order, though his eyes betrayed the wonder he felt. "When we reconvene, counsel will have the opportunity to address the new information presented," he said. "But it is now clear that this trial is no longer just about evidence. It is about truth, memory, and the bonds that sometimes speak louder than words." Emily's mother exhaled shakily, pressing her daughter close. "I didn't know she remembered him like this," she whispered. "I thought I had protected her by keeping it quiet." But she never forgot. She knew, even at 3 years old. Emily smiled, her small hand stroking Rex's fur. "I remembered," she said simply. And in the courtroom, everyone felt it. The invisible truth had been revealed, not through charts, documents, or arguments, but through the courage of a child and the unwavering loyalty of a dog. The extended recess had turned into something no one in the courthouse had anticipated. Reporters crowded the hallways, shouting into phones, trying to capture every detail of what had unfolded. Jurors whispered among themselves, still trying to process the extraordinary events. A 3-year-old child, a police dog, and memories so precise that they seemed to corroborate the evidence in ways no one had imagined. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense, almost electric. Every person knew that when the trial resumed, nothing would be the same. Emily sat on her mother's lap, still stroking Rex's fur. The dog lay at her feet, alert but calm, responding to her gentle voice. His presence alone carried weight. Now more than any witness, more than any piece of physical evidence. The judge rapped his gavel lightly. "Court will reconvene. Counsel, be prepared to address the new circumstances." The prosecution rose first, adjusting her jacket as she faced the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just witnessed is more than unusual behavior. You've witnessed the protective instincts of a canine officer in the memory of a child who survived a traumatic event. Emily's words and her recognition of Rex confirm events that night in a way that no testimony, document, or recording could ever convey. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. We are not asking you to take this lightly. This child's recollection and the dog's response provide proof beyond what conventional evidence can demonstrate. Rex did not just track the suspect, he protected her. And she remembers him, even at 3 years old. The defense attorney shook his head violently. This is preposterous. We cannot base a trial on the recollection of a toddler. She cannot testify under oath, and animals cannot provide evidence. This is circumstantial, anecdotal, and inadmissible. The judge's eyes narrowed. Counsel, silence. You will have your opportunity to argue, but I will hear the mother's account first. Emily's mother rose, trembling. She carried the weight of a secret she had hidden for years, a truth she had hoped would remain buried. Now, under the scrutiny of the court, it could no longer be contained. My daughter. She remembers the night of the break-in, she began, her voice shaky. I thought I had protected her by keeping her away from details. I told the officers she had slept through it. But she saw him, this dog, protecting her. She remembers being scared, but she also remembers him staying by her side, keeping her safe. The judge leaned forward, listening intently. The defendant shifted in his seat, the color draining from his face. His confident mask cracked as the weight of this new testimony hit him. He opened his mouth to speak, but the judge silenced him with a glare. Continue, the judge prompted the mother. She swallowed hard. Emily was too young to understand fully. I didn't realize she remembered anything until now. And yet, as she spoke to Rex, she recognized him. She remembered that he kept her safe. She remembered that he was there when I couldn't protect her. And seeing them together now, I know the truth cannot be denied. A hush fell over the courtroom. Jurors sat in stunned silence, scribbling notes furiously. The prosecution nodded, letting the mother's words resonate without interruption. Even the defense attorney seemed momentarily speechless. Rex shifted slightly, nudging Emily gently with his nose, as though affirming every word. The dog's calm demeanor and unwavering focus left no doubt in anyone's mind. He remembered her, and she remembered him. The judge spoke again, his tone heavy with authority. It is clear that new information has emerged that directly impacts this case. The court acknowledges the validity of a child's recollection when corroborated by credible evidence. In this instance, a canine officer who acted with discernible intent and recognition. The gallery murmured. Even seasoned reporters were whispering to one another. This was unprecedented. A child's memory paired with a trained police dog's behavior, directly influencing a trial. The prosecution moved closer to the jury. Please understand, what you witnessed is not imagination. This child's memory, reinforced by the dog's response, confirms that the defendant was present that night and that Rex acted to protect her. You have seen the evidence with your own eyes. The defense attorney's protests became sharper. This is a circus. We are being asked to accept a toddler's testimony and an animal's instincts as irrefutable proof. I object to this. Entirely. The judge banged the gavel. Objection noted. But the court will consider all aspects of the case, including this unforeseen development. Counsel, restrain your interruptions. The testimony continues. Emily, oblivious to the tension, leaned forward. Her small hand stroked Rex's head. He helped me, she said softly, but with clarity that stunned everyone. The words reverberated across the courtroom. Gasps erupted in the gallery. The jurors looked at each other, then back at the child. The defendant's face turned pale, his earlier bravado gone. He glanced nervously at his attorney, who could offer no immediate solution. Rex let out a soft whine, pressing his head against Emily's lap, reinforcing her words. His behavior was unmistakable, undeniable. The prosecutor spoke calmly, letting the moment sink in. Ladies and gentlemen, you've witnessed truth revealed. This child recalls the night accurately, and the dog confirms her memory through recognition and behavior. This is no longer speculation, it is corroborated fact. The mother, her voice stronger now, added, I wanted to protect her from the memory, but it's time to face the truth. That night, he saved her, and now she remembers it clearly. The courtroom fell silent for a long moment. Every person present seemed to sense the gravity of what had just been revealed. The entire trajectory of the trial had shifted. What had once been a matter of forensic evidence and witness testimony was now also about loyalty, recognition, and the intuitive truth expressed by both child and dog. Even the judge appeared affected. He tapped his gavel lightly, but spoke without the usual firmness. This court recognizes that the events as described by the mother, confirmed through the child's memory and the dog's actions, carry substantial weight. Counsel will have the opportunity to argue their implications when we resume testimony, but the record must reflect this extraordinary development. Rex lay quietly now, head resting gently on Emily's lap, tail moving in slow, steady sweeps. The child smiled down at him, unaware of the profound impact her words had made. Thank you, she whispered. The prosecutor nodded toward the jury, her voice measured but filled with quiet authority. Remember what you've seen. Remember what you've heard. A child's words, combined with the actions of a canine officer, can reveal truth beyond what any document or statement might capture. The defense attorney sank back into his chair, his face a mask of frustration and disbelief. He could no longer rely on technicalities alone. The human and animal evidence now presented an unassailable narrative. The judge leaned back, sighing heavily. Court is adjourned for a short recess. When we return, we will proceed with consideration of the implications of this testimony. As the gallery emptied for the break, Emily remained seated, gently patting Rex's head. Her mother held her close, whispering assurances, though tears streamed freely down her cheeks. I didn't know you remembered, she murmured. I thought I was protecting you. Emily smiled, as serene and innocent as ever. He helped. Emmy, she said again. He stayed with me. I wasn't scared alone. And in that quiet, small exchange between a child and a dog, the courtroom and the truth was forever altered. The courtroom had never felt so heavy with anticipation. Every seat was filled, every eye fixed on the front where Emily sat, tiny but commanding the attention of everyone present. Rex lay at her feet, still, yet radiating a calm confidence that only deepened the sense of awe in the room. After hours of recess and whispered deliberations, the jurors had returned, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and contemplation. Each had wrestled with the unprecedented circumstances. A 3-year-old child's recollection, a police dog's unmistakable recognition, and the mother's confirmation of what had been hidden for years. The trial, once procedural and predictable, had become a test of intuition, memory, and trust. The judge rapped the gavel sharply, calling the room to order. We will hear the final statements before the jury delivers its verdict. Counsel for the prosecution, you may proceed. The prosecutor stood, voice measured but firm. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have witnessed something extraordinary. You have seen a child, merely 3 years old, who remembers the events of a traumatic night with clarity and honesty. You have seen a trained canine officer respond to her with recognition and protection, confirming her recollection in a way no document, testimony, or report could ever replicate. These are not coincidences. They are corroborated truths. The defendants. Actions that night endangered the most vulnerable, and Rex's intervention saved a child. Your duty is clear. The evidence, now confirmed through both human and animal witnesses, demands justice. The defense attorney rose, attempting to regain composure. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, this court has witnessed unusual circumstances. But I remind you, a toddler's memory is imperfect, a child's perception subjective, and an animal's behavior instinctual. While the scene before you may be moving, you must consider the legal standards and the burden of proof. Emotion cannot replace evidence. The prosecutor shook her head subtly. With respect, Your Honor, what we have seen today is evidence. It is evidence of protection, recognition, and memory. It is evidence that cannot be dismissed, no matter how unconventional it may appear. The judge, having observed the extraordinary scene unfold over several days, spoke in a measured, solemn tone. I recognize that this trial has departed from standard proceedings. However, the court will not ignore the truths revealed before it. This child and this canine have provided testimony, albeit extraordinary, that confirms events central to this case. The jury may consider these facts in their deliberation. The gallery was silent, as if the words themselves carried weight heavier than any argument or evidence presented earlier. Emily leaned forward, her small hands resting on this bench, her gaze fixed on Rex. The dog lifted his head, ears flicking as though sensing her focus. His tail moved slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of her presence, of their connection. Finally, the judge addressed the jury. Members of the jury, you have heard and witnessed the events that transpired. You will now deliberate and return with your verdict. Remember the facts, but also consider the context and the corroboration provided by this child and this animal. The jurors nodded solemnly and filed out to deliberate. The courtroom felt suspended in time, each tick of the clock echoing like a heartbeat. Attorneys whispered quietly, reporters checked their notes, and spectators leaned forward, anxious to witness the final outcome. Emily's mother held her daughter close. You were brave, sweetheart, she whispered. You remembered everything, and you helped them understand the truth. Emily looked up at her mother with wide eyes. He's my good boy, she said softly, patting Rex's head. The dog responded with a low, contented whine, pressing his head closer. It was a quiet, almost sacred acknowledgement of the bond they shared. Hours passed, the air thick with anticipation. Finally, the jury filed back into the courtroom. Each member looked solemn, some holding back tears. The foreperson stood, holding the verdict slid carefully. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked. We have, Your Honor, the foreperson replied, voice steady but heavy with emotion. Please read the verdict. The foreperson unfolded the paper and read clearly, word by word. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts. We acknowledge the extraordinary evidence presented, including the testimony of the child and the actions of the canine officer, Rex, whose recognition and protection confirmed the events as described. A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Relief, disbelief, and awe mingled in the air. The defendant slumped in his chair, the weight of accountability finally settling upon him. The judge's gavel fell, sharp and decisive. The court thanks the jury for their deliberation and thanks all parties for their patience. Sentencing will follow in accordance with legal guidelines. As the courtroom emptied slowly, attention turned to Emily and Rex. The child rose from her mother's lap, stepping carefully toward the German shepherd. Thank you, she whispered again, this time directly to him. She hugged his massive head, and Rex responded with a gentle nuzzle, as though returning the gratitude in kind. Her mother's eyes welled with tears. You two. You helped everyone see the truth, she said softly. I never imagined a moment like this. Rex remained calm, though his eyes sparkled with a quiet awareness. The child and the dog had revealed a truth no one else could, and now, with justice affirmed, their bond had become something permanent, almost legendary. Reporters lingered, snapping photos and asking questions, but Emily barely noticed. She was focused entirely on Rex, the dog who had saved her, protected her, and now stood as a silent hero in the middle of the courtroom. One of the jurors leaned toward another, whispering, "I've been in courts for decades, and I've never seen anything like this. That dog and that child, they changed everything." The judge approached, observing the pair. "This courtroom has witnessed an extraordinary bond," he said quietly. "Let it serve as a reminder that truth can be revealed in the most unexpected ways." Emily's mother held her daughter as they walked toward the exit. "You were brave," she whispered again. "You showed everyone what really happened." Emily looked down at Rex. "We did it together," she said simply. The dog wagged his tail, nudging her gently. And in that moment, the courtroom filled with spectators. Lawyers, reporters, and jurors recognized something extraordinary. That the smallest voice, paired with loyalty and courage, could reveal the deepest truths. As they left the courthouse, people lingered in awe, talking in hushed tones about the events they had witnessed. The story would spread quickly. The child who spoke 2 words, the dog who remembered, and the extraordinary connection that had led to justice being served. For Emily, it was simple. The dog she called "my good boy" had been there when she needed him most. For Rex, it was instinct, training, and perhaps something deeper: recognition, loyalty, and the unspoken understanding between protector and child. The world outside the courthouse was bustling, unaware of the quiet heroism that had just taken place. But inside, a story had been told, a story of courage, recognition, and the bonds that connect us, human and animal alike. As they walked into the sunlight, Emily leaned down to Rex. "You're my good boy," she whispered once more. And he, in return, nuzzled her gently, a silent promise that he always would be. The courtroom's judgment had been delivered. But the story, the bond, the courage, and the 2 words that changed everything would remain in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it forever.